Local 4 News begins right now with a breaking news alert.
We're just a few seconds away here.
All right, well, we'll stand by. Count one again, racketeering. 3 defendants on this one. Kwame Kilpatrick, Bobby Ferguson, and also Bernard Kilpatrick involved in what they referred to repeatedly through this superseding indictment as the Kilpatrick Enterprise, this criminal enterprise within City of Detroit government.
Guilty of racketeering. Kwame Kilpatrick, guilty of racketeering. No verdict in regards to Bernard Kilpatrick on racketeering. Guilty for Bobby Ferguson on racketeering. So 2 of the 3 have been convicted on count 1, the biggest count of all, racketeering. Guilty for Kwame Kilpatrick, guilty for Bobby Ferguson, no decision for Bernard Kilpatrick. Running a criminal enterprise out of the mayor's office, that was the allegation, and they have been found guilty. Kwame Kilpatrick and Bobby Ferguson, both guilty of trying to enrich themselves, a 20-year penalty. Count 2, defendant Kwame Kilpatrick, guilty, the sewer lining contract. Bobby Ferguson, guilty. Both defendants in count 2, guilty. Again, a major, major decision that's going to impact their lives for the next 20 years.
And that's an extortion count.
It is.
Count 3, also extortion. This is another amendment to a sewer lining contract, a very rich contract.
Count 3, defendant Kwame Kilpatrick, guilty, induced under the color of official right. Defendant Bobby Ferguson, guilty, induced under the color of official right, induced by wrongful fear of economic harm. Both guilty convictions. Bernard Kilpatrick was not involved in that count.
Count 4 is what was known as the Baby Creek Patton Park contract. This again was a water main repair job.
Count 4, defendant Kwame Kilpatrick, guilty, induced under color of official right, induced by wrongful fear of economic harm. Defendant Bobby Ferguson, guilty, induced under color of official right, induced by wrongful fear of economic harm. Kwame Kilpatrick is sort of just showing signs of disbelief as these verdicts are being read. Count 5, attempted extortion, the Oakwood Pump Station. Defendant Kwame Kilpatrick, guilty, induced under color of official right, induced by wrongful fear of economic harm. Defendant Bobby Ferguson, guilty, induced under color of official right, induced by wrongful fear of economic harm. Again, guilty. Count 7, extortion. Unable to reach a decision as to Kwame Kilpatrick on count 7 of extortion on the outfalls contract. But as it pertains to Bobby Ferguson, guilty, induced by wrongful fear of economic harm. Count 8, asbestos abatement. Unable to reach a decision as to defendant Kwame Kilpatrick, defendant Bobby Ferguson is guilty, induced by wrongful fear of economic harm. All of these counts are the main counts that carry the most prison time that we've been talking about so far, and we've reached multiple guilties, all guilties for Bobby Ferguson, several guilties for Kwame Kilpatrick, a couple of non-decisions on Kilpatrick. We've heard no guilty verdicts for Bernard Kilpatrick at all. Count 9, extortion, repair of the East Side water mains. Defendant Kwame Kilpatrick, guilty, induced under color of official right, induced by wrongful fear of economic harm. Defendant Bobby Ferguson, guilty, both guilty. Okay, count 10, extortion, the East Side sewer repair. Not guilty for defendant Kwame Kilpatrick. His first not guilty. Defendant Bobby Ferguson, not guilty. The jury did not buy the allegations made as it pertained to the East Side sewer repair. Both defendants not guilty. Count 15, attempted extortion with the sludge contract. Defendant Bernard Kilpatrick, not guilty. Another not guilty for Bernard Kilpatrick. We talked about that earlier. That was James Rosendahl in the Synagro scandal. He came off as a very unbelievable, they showed several instances of him being a liar, and they did not convict Bernard Kilpatrick on that extortion. Count 16, bribery. The $90,000 bribe of Mahlon Cliff. Did he bring that money through the airport and deliver it to Kwame Kilpatrick? That's count 16, and the jury is unable to reach an agreement. Some thought he did, some thought he didn't. They were not able to reach a decision on that. Count 17, bribery, $75,000. Defendant Kwame Kilpatrick, guilty. Defendant Bobby Ferguson, guilty. So both Kilpatrick and Ferguson now have bribery charges as well. I'm sorry, it's coming in quick. Count 18, Kwame Kilpatrick, mail fraud. That's the civic fund money. Kwame Kilpatrick, guilty. Count 19, mail fraud, the civic fund money, guilty. Kwame Kilpatrick. Count 20, guilty. Count 21, guilty. Count 22, guilty. Count 23, guilty. Count 24, guilty. Count 25, guilty. Count 26, guilty. Count 27, not guilty. So one not guilty out of all those mail frauds. More still coming in. Count 28, wire fraud, guilty. Kwame Kilpatrick. Count 29, wire fraud, not guilty. So here, one guilty, one not guilty on the wire fraud allegations. Count 30, wire fraud, guilty. Now we move to the tax. Count 31, Kwame Kilpatrick, guilty. Count 32, defendant Kwame Kilpatrick, false tax return, guilty. Count 33, subscribing false tax return, Kwame Kilpatrick, guilty. Count 34, Kwame Kilpatrick, subscribing false tax return, guilty. Count 35, subscribing false tax return, Kwame Kilpatrick, guilty. Count 36, defendant Kwame Kilpatrick, income tax evasion, guilty. Count 37, subscribing to a false tax return, defendant Bernard Kilpatrick, not guilty. Bernard Kilpatrick was not guilty of that. Finally, count 38, subscribing false tax return, defendant Bernard Kilpatrick, guilty. So on the final count, Bernard Kilpatrick is found guilty of subscribing a false tax return. He is not guilty of extortion. They could not decide on the RICO case. Kwame Kilpatrick looks absolutely stunned, as if he cannot believe what just transpired in this courtroom, that on almost all of the counts, and the most important RICO count, he was convicted guilty by all 12 jurors in this case.
And Kevin, you mentioned a term there that our friends at home may not be familiar with, which is induced under color of official right when making this count. What that means is he used his office to apply pressure, basically?
Absolutely. That's what the prosecution has been saying. If he were not the mayor of the city of Detroit, he could not get these crimes committed. He would not be able to scare away business owners if he were not the mayor. So he used his power as the mayor. He said, I'm the mayor, and if you don't hire Bobby Ferguson, then you will not get work here. And that's using his office to enrich himself and Bobby Ferguson, and that's why they were convicted. Those two were convicted of racketeering. Again, Bernard Kilpatrick not convicted of racketeering.
And we should also point out, this again is under the extortion charges, induced by wrongful fear of economic harm. What that pertains to is when one of these defendants would say, either do this, in many cases include Bobby Ferguson on the contract, or you'll lose the deal.
Absolutely. That is what, I mean, every single count, they went right from top to bottom on all these main allegations that the deal was fixed, that if Bobby didn't get the work, Kwame would kill the deal. Guilty, 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 guilty of racketeering, guilty of extortion, guilty of bribery. Up and down the line, they agreed with the prosecution that the fix was in. Bobby Ferguson was going to get this work.
Count 16, no consensus.
And what is Bobby Ferguson's demeanor, Kevin?
Well, no. What's Bobby Ferguson? They listened as each count came in. They just sort of sat there stunned. The only animation coming from Kwame Kilpatrick, sort of lifting up his arms like, you got to be kidding me, kind of. Bernard Kilpatrick is out of camera view, and we're actually not able to see what he's doing. We'll have to wait for Hank Winchester to come out of the courtroom to tell us what Bernard Kilpatrick's reaction was.
Are you able to see any reaction of family members that are there in the courtroom?
It's just really kind of a stunned, quiet event. There was no shrieking, no cheering, no anything. Just listening as this wave of count after count after count came in, and all of these guilty verdicts came in. Obviously, Bernard Kilpatrick must be very relieved. He told me on the last day of this trial that he felt a lot better now than he did going in, that he did not think they proved any of the charges against him. They did, however, get subscribing a false tax return guilty for him, and that is not. That's not a great thing for him, but it's nothing compared to what was alleged.
Well, that carries up to 3 years in prison and or a $100,000 fine for the one guilty verdict for Bernard Kilpatrick subscribing false tax returns. Kevin, we have our Keith here to...
Let me give you one more piece of information before Keith takes over here.
Okay.
Keith talked earlier about, do they want to hold these guys immediately, or do they want to let them go and come back at a later time for sentencing? They have decided to have a hearing today at 1:30. The prosecution is going to ask that they be detained. The defense is going to fight for them to have the ability to not be detained and say that they've showed up for every appearance, that they're not a flight risk, that they should be given the opportunity to go home and prepare for sentencing and prepare for what's coming, which is certainly decades of prison time. At 1:30, the judge will have a hearing on whether they will be detained immediately or if they will be able to go home and prepare for their fate.
And the prosecution, you think, Kevin, can they make a strong case that these men are a flight risk, given the amount of money we're talking about that could have been salted away?
They believe there are tens of millions of dollars that are hidden somewhere. They have done search warrants on properties belonging to Bobby Ferguson, and on each search they've done, they have found over $900,000. They know there is money out there. They believe more than $50 million is still missing that they can't account for, that they don't know where it is. So they will say that these folks will try and flee. It's whether or not the judge thinks they're a flight risk or not.
All right, Kevin. So once again, if you are just joining us, we are following the Kwame Kilpatrick corruption trial. Guilty of racketeering, extortion, bribery, mail fraud.
You know how many, Megan? The jury has also, some of the jurors have decided that they will talk and they will describe what took place during these deliberations and what impact the trial had and what the key points were. They have asked that no members of the public be allowed at that session. Only members of the media will be allowed to hear that. And also, because this is federal court and this is going to take place in federal court, there will be no cameras and no tape recording. So our reporters will be taking notes on what they had to say as they come out of the courthouse. We, of course, will give them an opportunity to go on camera and share their thoughts. But we will have an inside look as to what the jurors were thinking, and that will take place in probably the next 30 minutes or so. The jurors that wish to will come out and share with us what they went through over the last 5 months.
All right, Kevin. Thank you very much. We should tell our viewers that as you look live at the federal courthouse, the perimeter around the courthouse has been sealed off by federal marshals and also by the Detroit Police Department. They don't want to have any impromptu demonstrations or any problems there. So that area has been sealed off.
Okay.
Keith, by my count, 23 convictions for Kwame Kilpatrick, 10 for Bobby Ferguson. For the federal government, that's a slam dunk. That's like running the table.
Like a minute.
The prosecution has to be overjoyed. I mean, they clearly convinced the jury and satisfied the jury that the theory that they proceeded under, that Kwame Kilpatrick had misused the position of the mayor's office to personally enrich himself and his friends, is borne out by this verdict overwhelmingly. And I'm sure the prosecutors are overjoyed right now.
And you're listening to Keith Corbett, who is a veteran prosecutor for the federal government for many, many years, who has seen many of these, a lot of these corruption cases that didn't turn out so well in many cases for the federal government. And these are not easy cases to try.
No, they're not. And one of the good things, I think, about this case is we pointed out the ethnic makeup of the jury. We had a large number of African Americans and Hispanics. So this is truly a community verdict. I mean, this is truly a verdict of the people of the Detroit metropolitan area, which reflects well on the people and on the government in terms of presenting a case that convinced these people that the crimes alleged occurred.
We're going to go out to Karen Drew, who is outside of the courthouse right now, standing by with Andy Arena. Karen?
What's your reaction?
It's a good day for the city of Detroit. I mean, this is a block that I think the city can move forward and build on. I'm very happy for the agents. I'm very happy for the prosecutors who worked this case. And I'm very, very proud of the jurors. I mean, it's obvious they put a lot of hard work and they did their job.
A lot of people were saying the first one, RICO, if you get guilty on that, that's considered a home run because of the severity of those charges, the sentence that it holds. What's your opinion on that first charge?
The RICO is the hammer. Quite frankly, Karen, that was the one I was personally most worried about. That's a very, very difficult charge to prove. It's very, very nebulous. And you're also looking at a lot of those underlying charges prop up that RICO case. So I could have very well, I could have seen them say not guilty on RICO and go with some of the underlying charges. So I'm a little bit amazed that they did convict on the RICO.
And there was a whole long list of extortion, etc. I mean, the number of guilty counts is quite amazing. I mean, when you take a look at any case, it just seems that you're quite surprised at the number of guilties. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think this jury did their job. They really were very, very diligent. I mean, look, there were some not guilties, there were some hung charges. They did their job. They really, really dug down and looked at this stuff. They did a great job.
And what do you think this? Yes, are you speaking to me, Rhonda?
No, go ahead.
Sorry, we're having a couple.
Go ahead, Karen.
Sorry about that. We're having a couple sound pieces here. What does it feel like for you? I mean, you put blood, sweat, and tears into this case. What does this mean for the FBI, for the investigative unit, and also for what it means to the city?
Well, personally, for me, I a long time ago, I learned, this is nothing personal. It's a job. I'm very happy for the agents. I'm very happy for the prosecutors who worked on this case and put so much time into it. And I'm very, very happy for the city of Detroit. This is a block that we can build on now. This trial exposed generations of misdeed. This really showed how business was done here in the city of Detroit. It's out in the open now. No more. No more.
What about your reaction to, obviously, Bobby Ferguson had a long list of guilties as well as Kwame Kilpatrick. Yeah. Your reaction to those charges against Bobby Ferguson?
The same. I mean, I think, Bobby obviously was tried before. It was a hung jury. I think he better think long and hard about retrying that case right now.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, lastly, with Bernard, he did get that guilty on the 2005 filing of his taxes. Not a huge terms of sentence in terms of prison time, but still a guilty.
It's a guilty. It's a guilty charge. He's got a felony record now, and I think it just shows the jury did what they were supposed to do. They looked hard.
We need to. Kevin Dietz joins us now. You're live inside of the courthouse, Kevin.
Are you surprised at all, Mr. Kilpatrick, his reaction? He did a lot of this. Like, what are you talking about? I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. Is that kind of what you saw through all these years of investigation?
Yeah, I think he is a person who's still struggling to come to grips with what he did. He's struggling to come to grips with what he is, quite frankly. I don't think he understands what he did to the city. I think the citizens of this city should be outraged at his performance today. But I think that's classic Kwame Kilpatrick.
We heard a lot of people say, boy, why is the government spending all this money? He's suffered enough. Years and years of investigators, dozens of FBI agents, dozens of federal prosecutors. Why does the federal government have to do this, and what does today's verdict mean? Well,
I think beyond what Mr. Kilpatrick thinks, this is bigger than him. You and I have talked about this, Kevin. This trial exposed how business was done for generations in the city of Detroit. It can't go forward like that, and I don't think it does anymore. I think this really laid it out for the people, how dirty business was in the city of Detroit. So this is beyond, no matter what he thinks, this is beyond Kwame Kilpatrick. It's bigger than him.
Do you think people understand how this is real money? We're talking about tens of millions of dollars that the jury just said was stolen from tax dollars. They did not get the services they deserved. This trickles down to every single person who lives in the city. Every person who works in this city lost money because of the way Kilpatrick was running the mayor's office.
We're as the governor says, we're in a financial distress right now, financial emergency. This is one of the reasons, because of people like this. It's the taxpayers' money. It's the people I run a 501c3 non-for-profit. I have to track every dime. There was a great quote I wanted to use, Kevin, when he was charged, but I was head of the FBI and I couldn't use it. I'll use it today. That money for the Civic Fund was to go to kids, to go to camp. Yeah, kids went to camp, his kids.
Kwame Kilpatrick said you were setting me up for a comeback. That comeback definitely delayed by 20 years at least.
It's delayed for a few years, yeah.
Okay, we're going to go to Rod Maloney now, and we'll stand by here as the defendants come out.
Hold on. We got Bobby Ferguson across the street here.
See what happens when you cheat the people?
Can you come with me here, Sean? All right, we got Bobby Ferguson crossing the street right now with his attorney, Evelyn.
Go to jail. Go
all right.
directly to jail, Bobby Ferguson.
We've got people in the street now yelling at him, saying, "This is what you get."
Okay. Yeah. What was your thoughts when it came down?
God is good all the time. My faith ain't changed now, okay? I'm the same person.
You can survive this?
Oh, yeah. God is good. It's all. My faith's strong. It's a temporary situation.
Do you still maintain your innocence despite what the jury said?
Yes, sir.
Still? You're appealing then? It's a lot of money the children don't have, sir. Are you remorseful?
Excuse me. Mr. Ferguson, was this just the way business was done in Detroit, or was this illegal as the jury has said?
Or did you take the money out of the children's future? Is that what you did? You ashamed of it at all, sir?
Mr. Evelyn, what were your thoughts on the jury's response?
Yeah, he is.
Will you be appealing?
You referenced Psalms when you came in. Any other reference you want to make?
Isaiah 54, verse 17.
Why is that?
Try Ecclesiastes. It's a good book.
Bobby Ferguson.
Hi, this is Kevin Dietz. Can we?
Gerald Evelyn going into the Penobscot building there where Gerald Evelyn has had offices. That was the area that they came out of most days. And that is where they will wait until this 1:30 hearing where we should find out whether or not Bobby Ferguson, Kwame Kilpatrick will get bond and will be freed pending sentencing, or whether they will go back to prison immediately. And be remanded to the federal marshals. You heard Bobby Ferguson say, God is good. My faith is strong. When asked if he maintains his innocence, he says, of course I do.
And we know that he does face up to 20 years in prison. Many of the counts, at least, that he was found guilty on, with racketeering, extortion, along with bribery, all in many cases mail fraud, up to 20 years he's facing on each of these counts. But as you were saying, Keith, and Kevin as well, just weighing in on that would be the maximum that any of them could face.
Right. They generally merge the sentences.
Bobby Ferguson came out of court, and again, he said God is good, and that's something he said to me over the past couple of weeks. And what he means by that is that he's accepted whatever God has in store for him. If the jury came back with a guilty verdict, then he accepts that guilty verdict, and he will pay the penalty for doing his part in what took place. He is not someone who is going to run from the allegations. He says, and he's told me on numerous occasions, that he does not believe he broke any laws. But if the jury of his peers says that he did, then he will accept what they have to say, and he will move forward. And that is the reference he's making when he says God is good, and he's quoting the Bible verses. He's just now understanding that he's probably looking at 20 years in prison, and he's going to need every ounce of strength he has to get through that, but he's preparing for it the best he can. Kwame Kilpatrick, on the other hand, in court, he did a lot of this. He's like, what are you talking about? What is, I don't understand. How can you say guilty? I mean, he wasn't saying those words, just waving his arms in complete disbelief that this jury could find him guilty of racketeering, guilty of extortion, guilty of bribery, guilty of tax charges, up and down, guilty, guilty, guilty. Kwame Kilpatrick also looking at 20 years in prison, but he feels the jury got it wrong. Bobby Ferguson seems to be accepting his fate.
And we're going to bring Keith in as well. And Kevin made the point there, Keith, that it's likely that they could see 20 years. Is that your opinion as well?
Well, you have to score it, but I would anticipate that the guidelines in this case, given the amount of money and the number of substantive extortion counts on which they were convicted, both of them, both Mr. Ferguson and Mr. Kilpatrick, Mr. Kilpatrick will get additional sentencing for what they call abuse of a position of trust. As the mayor, that's one of the factors that he misused his public office to accumulate these monies. So it's quite possible his guideline range will be in the 10, 15, maybe even 20-year range. And the judge, if she's satisfied that his conduct was outrageous, can sentence him to the maximum permissible, which would be 240 months.
Can she exceed the guidelines?
No, the guidelines, she can exceed the guidelines. She can't exceed the statutory sentence. So 240 months would be the maximum sentence she could impose. You'll have to see how the probation department scores the case in order to determine what the guidelines are. But I would anticipate we're talking somewhere north of 150 to 180 months.
And how quickly would we get that sentencing?
Generally speaking, when I was in the office, and the burden of the probation department may be greater or lesser now, we're talking 2 to 3 months. This is a fairly extensive process of reviewing the defendant's entire life, reviewing the offense, scoring it. If the judge ordered it to be done a little more quickly, it might be, but I can't anticipate anything less than 2 months.
Because you have multiple convictions, that raises the likelihood that he will get a stiffer penalty.
That's correct, because he has all the substantive offenses, and each one of those impacts on the guideline computation because he was convicted of substantive offenses, including the mail frauds and the tax frauds.
We want to get back out to our reporters who are standing by for us. Hank Winchester was in the courtroom as the verdicts were announced, and also Rod Maloney standing by for us as well. Let's get to both of you.
Yeah, this is the car that Kwame Kilpatrick came in, and Hank says it was Bobby Ferguson's family, and in fact Bobby Ferguson's family is getting in, but Kwame Kilpatrick is not here. Now, we've gone back over the list, and the way it shakes out here is 24 of 30 guilty counts for Kwame Kilpatrick, 9 of 11 for Bobby Ferguson, and 1 of 3, and not Rico, for Bernard Kilpatrick. You were in the courtroom, Hank. What was it like in there?
Rod, it was unlike anything I've ever seen in the courtroom. First, Bobby Ferguson was the first person to walk in of the defendants, and it was like he was walking into a wedding reception. I mean, he was high-fiving, he was shaking hands with his family, gave his wife a kiss on the cheek. Kwame Kilpatrick and Bernard Kilpatrick, much different looks. They looked very serious. They appeared pensive. At one point, Bernard Kilpatrick turned to his son Kwame, though, and under his breath said, "You got this." Then the jury was brought in, and the mood completely changed within the courtroom. We knew that this was coming. The verdicts were read then at that point, and you could see the look on Kwame Kilpatrick's face of utter shock. He was shaking his head. He was wiping his forehead. Each time a guilty verdict came down, it appeared that he became more amazed that this was actually turning against him. It seemed like he really couldn't believe how this was playing out. The same thing with Bernard Kilpatrick. It appeared at one point that Bernard Kilpatrick looked like he was going to become emotional. His mouth, his lips were quivering as he looked at his son.
Kevin, go to Kevin.
Yep, let's get you over to Kevin Dietz right now.
Mr. Kilpatrick.
How you feel?
What do you have to say, sir? Everybody back.
Your wife and kids?
How you feel?
Go back. Any reaction at all?
Not at this
Everybody
time.
needs to go back. You admit it now, Quan? 5, 6, 7.
Not at this time. I don't have any comment.
What about your family, your wife and kids?
What do you want to say to the citizens of Detroit?
Anything to say to the citizens of Detroit?
What do you think? It's a lot of years. Lots of years. Half a century, maybe.
How you doing?
When it came down, sir, you had sort of a disbelief reaction. Your thoughts?
Excuse me.
What do you say to your kids, Kwame?
Excuse me.
Or the rest of the kids.
What do you say to all those taxpayers who spent all that money?
The babies.
Millions of dollars.
Excuse me.
In a city that's
Are you
broke.
sorry?
Excuse me.
How about just that one? Are you sorry? Kwame.
Mr. Kilpatrick?
Are you sorry?
Well,
A very somber Kwame Kilpatrick, uncharacteristically glum, as he comes out of the courthouse with, depending on how you count this, either 23 or 24 serious convictions against him that could put him into prison for up to 20 years. And you think about...
He will be back at 1:30. Remember, there is a hearing for Mr. Kilpatrick as to whether or not they're going to detain him immediately or if they're going to allow him to remain free on bond pending the sentencing. Usually it takes a month or two for pretrial services to prepare their reports and then sentence at federal court. The prosecutors want Kwame Kilpatrick to go to jail immediately, to be locked up and taken away. They believe him and Bobby Ferguson are flight risks, and they are concerned about that deeply. The defense will say that they have come for every court appearance, they have missed nothing, and that they will show up when it's time for sentencing, and that they have no intentions of running whatsoever. That hearing is at 1:30. So while the defendants left the courthouse today saying very little. Kwame Kilpatrick saying no comment at this time. Bobby Ferguson saying God is good. They will be back at 1:30 to find out if they're going to jail immediately or if they'll have some time to prepare.
Kevin, you've been in the courtroom following this case every single day. You've been following the Kwame Kilpatrick story for years. What's your reaction to what you just witnessed?
It's sad. It's really, really, really sad. Kwame Kilpatrick has 3 kids. He has a wife. He has a family. He's a young man. He's going to prison for 20 years. It is sad. It is even more sad that 700,000 citizens of Detroit put their trust in this man to make Detroit as good of a place as it could be, and yet he used that to steal money. The jury said guilty. He used his office as mayor to steal money and give that money to Bobby Ferguson. He demanded that businessmen fly him all over the country. He demanded that he and his family and friends be flown to Vegas and to Florida, all the time he should have been being as good of a mayor as he could. This city, I've worked here for 20 years. I've lived here my whole life. This city needed a leader that would move Detroit forward. Instead, they had a leader that padded his pockets with cash. Millions and millions of dollars that could have gone to making this city better went to Bobby Ferguson. We did not get the best services for the money that we paid, and that is truly sad for all of us. Sad for the defendants, sad for the citizens, sad for the city of Detroit. Hopefully, on this day, we move forward. Hopefully, the leaders that have been voted into office say, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to run it clean, because if we don't, we could end up in this courthouse one day listening to testimony. This city has got to run a clean operation if it's going to come back. So today, a message to all politicians to do it right.
And Kevin, we should point out that when people want to know how this affects them, if they've got garbage that isn't picked up, EMS trucks that are faulty, weeds that won't get cut, parks that aren't inhabitable for their children, those are all things that are consequences of money being diverted away from what the purpose should be.
It is, and here comes Bernard Kilpatrick. We're going to try and get a quick reaction. Mr. Kilpatrick, your reaction today to those not guilties and non-decisions? You said you felt good going out. How do you feel now?
Terrible.
Terrible for your son?
Absolutely.
Yes. You think the jury got it wrong?
Absolutely.
Bernard Kilpatrick leaving the courthouse. He was found not guilty of all the major charges, just guilty of one tax charge. But he says he feels absolutely terrible that the jury got it wrong. That the jury that convicted his son of 20-year crimes, racketeering, extortion, bribery, he says they absolutely got it wrong. Bernard Kilpatrick leaving the courthouse right now after being convicted of just one charge, a tax charge on the racketeering. The jury could not decide as to his guilt or innocence. In effect, they were hung on whether or not he was involved in the racketeering. It's going to be very interesting now. The prosecutors have a tough decision to make. Do they say, okay, we got a home run as it pertains to Bobby Ferguson and Kwame Kilpatrick, we got the major charges? Or do they say, you know what, we want another jury to come back and see about Bernard Kilpatrick. We'd like to have someone come back and take a look at this. I'm going to leave that up to Keith Corbett and some of the other experts. I think it's highly unlikely that they'll come back and try and charge Bobby Ferguson or Bernard Kilpatrick with any of these other crimes, the extortion and the racketeering. However, if the jury is hung, they would have a right to do that, I believe. So that could be interesting as this plays out. Again, Bernard Kilpatrick saying he feels terrible that the jury got this absolutely wrong as it pertains to his son Kwame Kilpatrick, who was convicted of racketeering.
We're just getting this statement in from Mayor Bing's office, and we did want to share that with our viewers right now. It says, "I'm pleased that this long trial is ended and we can finally put this negative chapter in Detroit's history behind us. It is time for all of us to move forward with a renewed commitment to transparency and high ethical standards in our city." That is the statement that we received following the verdict in the Kilpatrick corruption trial from Mayor Dave Bing. We want to also get some reaction from the community about this. That's the one population of people that we haven't heard from yet.
Yeah, we've talked to some people that are opinion makers like Mildred Gaddis and others, but let's turn to Roger Weber, who's standing by live, kind of taking the temperature of folks that have been awaiting this verdict for many months. Roger?
It has been a long wait, Guy. I'm at the Omega Grill at Southfield and Grand River, a popular hangout for people in Rosedale Park. And after people were enjoying their bacon and eggs or working on the grill, they did listen to this verdict with great anticipation as Kevin Dietz read decision after decision. A lot of people here were surprised that this was not a hung jury, but they all agreed this was the right verdict.
Now, there are people who have character and people who are characters. And people who are characters don't ride in on the back of people who have a character. Kwame got what he deserves. You know, we don't have merit badges today like you did in the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts for embezzlement and adultery and lying. And he got what he deserved.
The verdict might be just for all three of them. You know, you stuck your hand in the cookie jar and you got caught. So that's, you know, same thing apply to you and I.
What is your thought about the Kwame Kilpatrick, a guy who came on so young, he had the world by the tail, 31-year-old mayor, and now it's turned into this?
I feel sorry for him for that, because he did get to where he got to by knowledge, and his career took him as far as he could take him. Could have gone further if he didn't get caught in the scandal. We'll never know what he could have been as a just man. I feel sorry for him and his family.
Do you think this kind of verdict will make people take notice and end the corruption, or will it be business as usual in the city?
In the long run, it might be business as usual because, you know, politicians, there's always some crooked politicians, and we happen to get caught up with a few that was our leaders.
Well, the verdict is in. We're getting some reaction. What do you think about what you just saw?
I think it's good. It's about time. I didn't think it had happened that way, but it did, and I'm glad of it.
Do you think this was the right verdict?
I would say so. Yeah, I would say so for the citizen of Detroit.
What is the importance for the city of this kind of verdict, if you see any?
Well, I think the city needs to move on and try to get things taken care of. We got a lot more problems in the city to worry about.
One woman I talked to was struck by the demeanor of Kwame Kilpatrick, this man who had been so upbeat even in the middle of this trial, clearly devastated over this verdict. Another man saw him getting into the car and said to Kwame Kilpatrick, "Say good day." Kilpatrick called this trial at the very beginning his monster. It turned out to be every bit of that.
Welcome back to our extended coverage. Let's go to Michael Rattay, Bobby Ferguson's attorney, who's speaking live right now.
That will still go forward.
I have no clue. You have to talk to U.S. Attorney's Office about that.
What's going to happen at 1:30?
There's going to be a bond hearing.
And what do you hope to say? What's your
well, I mean, we would hope that the judge would let him out on bond like she does, like most of the judges in this building do, even with drug dealers and things like that who are out on bond pending sentence. And I don't think these fellas should be treated any differently, but that'll be up to the judge.
They've been to all their hearings. That's the point. That they're
well, the two major issues, are they a flight risk and are they a danger to the community? And I would submit to you on both of those issues, the answer is no.
Tell us your reaction to the verdict today that came down.
Well, we're, you know, disappointed, obviously, to say the least. You know, you go into these things expecting to win. You don't go into them expecting to lose. And so when you come out and it doesn't go your way, obviously it's a tough pill to swallow.
Based on the fact that there were some guilty verdicts and some non-guilties, what does that tell you? Do you feel the jury did a thorough job?
Well, you know, listen, you know, in this business, you know, we got to put our hands, I mean, that's the way the system works. This is the way the thing has been set up over 200 and some odd years ago, right? And when we practice, in, you know, us criminal defense lawyers throughout the country, you know, we give 100% to the Constitution and defending our clients' rights. And at the end of the day, you know, you have to rely on the jury to, you know, follow their oath and look at the evidence and come away with a just decision. And when it doesn't go our way, we have to live with that. And that's the way the ball bounces.
And the jury did say that your client was involved in racketeering, that a criminal enterprise was being run, and that millions of dollars was stolen from the taxpayers. What do you say about that?
No, like I say, I have to live with that decision. You know, I went into court every day fighting for my client, doing the best that I possibly could, just like all the other defense attorneys. And, you know, it's not easy to look yourself in the mirror at the end of the day and say you came up short. It's not an easy thing. But it is what it is, and we have to live with it.
Mr. Ferguson just said God is good. What do you take from that? Is he just being spiritual or just getting prepared?
Well, Bobby Ferguson's a spiritual guy. You know, he believes in a higher power, and I'm sure that he'll rely on his faith to carry him through in the over the next remaining part of his life.
Are there appealable issues?
I don't want to talk about that right now.
Do you have any idea how long of a sentence he'll get?
I have no idea.
You had a jury that you liked. The prosecution said they liked the jury, the makeup of the jury. What are your thoughts now, looking back?
Well, I mean, I don't want to say that I don't like the jury now, because there was a good cross-section of the community. There's no question about that. And we were pleased with the composition of the jury. So, we can't complain about that.
There were some minor complaints about maybe the judge ruling too favorably for the prosecution. Do you feel like you got your day in court?
No, I don't want to call it. I've already made those comments, and we'll let those hang.
It was a long slog for you.
Yeah.
Anything you could have done differently now that you're thinking about it?
Well, that's one of the things you do. And, unfortunately, I don't lose many cases, okay? But when you do, you certainly have to go back and reflect and figure out what you can do better the next time. You're always going to second guess yourself. Otherwise, you're never going to improve as an attorney. So, you have to, you have to look at yourself in the mirror, and you have to figure out, well, what could I have done better? That's certainly part of the process, and we all do that. So.
You think Mercado pleading guilty early in this thing sort of twisted the jury a little bit?
It's hard to say, Charlie. I have no idea. I mean, I think that was asked of one of the jurors in the press conference there inside the courtroom, and they claimed that it made no difference because the judge told them that they're not to consider that, and they said they didn't consider it. So I have to take them at their word.
Mike, I apologize if
Yeah.
this has been asked, but how do you feel about the prosecution's move to ask for an immediate remand? Is that unusual? Is that piling on?
I think so. Because, I mean, there's a lot of people that are charged with a lot of things and are convicted and plead guilty to a lot of things in this building. And usually 9 times out of 10, they're given bond pending sentence. And the two major issues are whether they're flight risks and whether they're dangers to the community. And I would submit to you, as I've stated earlier, that they're not. So they should be awarded bond pending appeal, but we're going to have to go slug that one out. So
people believe that there's millions of dollars that are missing and that they would have the financial resources to flee if they wanted to.
Well, I don't. You guys would know about that than I. But I don't think that Mr. Kilpatrick is a flight risk, and I know Mr. Ferguson's not a flight risk, and he's certainly neither one gentlemen are dangerous to the community. So they should be treated like everybody else that comes through this building.
Sir, I came in a little late. Did you say you would appeal? What are the chances?
I don't know anything about appeal. I mean, the smoke hasn't even cleared yet. So to talk about an appeal at this point is premature.
Mike, I know you're a hopeful guy. We just came out of the courtroom. We asked the jurors how they felt about the lawyering.
Yeah.
And every answer that came back from them was that it was the evidence that resulted in this decision.
Sure.
Does that give you any comfort on a day when I know you're hurt?
Not really, ML, to be honest with you. What you hope to do is I've talked for the last 6 months out here on the corner, that the case is in the cross-exam, and so we're disappointed that we did not apparently on most of the issues punch holes in the government story, although we felt that we had. So
do you think it hurt at all that the defendants chose not to talk? I know it's not to be held against them, but do you think jurors would have wanted to hear from them?
You know what? I mean, they said it wouldn't have made any difference. And so, again, I'm going to have to take them at their word on that. But, they all have a constitutional right not to testify, and that silence can't be used against them. And that is that's one of the foundations of our system of justice. So I would hope that it didn't play any role whatsoever. And they said that it didn't. So, like I said, I'm going to take them at their word.
Well, Mike, on the cross-examination, it looked like the jury was not persuaded by Malon Clift. It looks like they were not persuaded by Avinash Rachmali and Thomas Hardman.
Yeah.
If your clients are found guilty of accepting bribes, should the bribers be charged at some point? Is that only
Well, that's not for me to say, ML. That's for the U.S. attorneys. That's their call. That's not my call. I can only defend those who are charged. I have my personal opinions about it, but you know, my personal opinions really have no moment at this point. So I'll let that one hang.
The jury did not seem to buy James Rosendahl at all. I know Bernard Kilpatrick's not your client, but what are your thoughts on the fact that he eluded all of the serious charges?
Well, we're happy for Bernard. We're happy for John Shea. He did a hell of a job in there, and you know, I'm just glad he's not going to die in prison. So I'm happy for that.
Mike, thanks.
Okay, guys. Okay, thanks, guys.
Okay. Mike Rattay, Bobby Ferguson's attorney, telling us today that he's very disappointed in the convictions against his client, Bobby Ferguson, that they felt that they did the best job they could in court. They had hoped they had swayed the jury to believe that they were not guilty, but at the end of the day, they accept what the jury has come down with, and that is that Bobby Ferguson is in fact guilty of racketeering, extortion, and other charges that will likely send him to prison for up to 20 years.
All right, thanks so much, Kevin. The unsung heroes in all of this are these 12 men and women who gave up nearly 7 months of their lives to hear the evidence, to weigh it, and to go about their job. And it was their job for 7 months, very deliberately.
And just seeing some of the transcripts from the courtroom, you can tell that they took it very, very seriously. I'm just going to share one. It was from juror number 6, who said, "Took each and every charge seriously and tried to evaluate each individual charge based on the evidence. We took each and every charge seriously." That was from juror number 6.
And we heard so much eloquence. Hank Winchester's been looking over this, was in the courtroom as these jurors were debriefed. And there really is some impressive eloquence on the parts of these common men and women that were asked to do an extraordinary job.
Absolutely, Guy and Rhonda. We just spent about 45 minutes with the jurors upstairs in the courtroom answering questions from the media. Cameras were not allowed in the courtroom, though. The one thing that really struck me right off the bat is that all of these men and women, you can tell, have a great sense of respect for one another. They mentioned it several times that they wanted to make sure each one of them had an opportunity back in the jury room to let their feelings know, to be able to ask any questions. And they certainly did that. And today, they really took the time to answer questions of the media and also to talk about the process as a whole. I want to share a few quotes from you from these jurors. Juror number 12, who was a white female, at one point was asked about the verdict and what the message is that's being sent out as a result of the verdict. And she said, if you do something that's illegal, a jury will make sure that they make a correct decision. Another part of this that was playing out was questions about evidence. A lot of members of the media wanted to know, was there one witness? Was there one key piece of testimony, a text message that maybe helped sway your opinion? And 3 or 4 of the jurors all said there wasn't one specific thing. There wasn't one person that helped change their mind. Rather, they looked at the evidence as a whole, and they were asked specifically about text messages, and they said while they found the text messages to be compelling, it didn't make or break the deal. We also asked them about Victor Mercado, the fact that Mercado was in the courtroom, was a defendant early on, and then, as we know, made a deal for himself and then no longer appeared in the courtroom. The jury still at this point was only told that Mercado was no longer a factor, and today they said they still don't know what happened to Mercado. They just know that they were not supposed to take anything involving Mercado to make a decision regarding Ferguson and the Kilpatricks. Talking about some of the emotion regarding this trial and feelings towards the defendant's family members appearing in court. Kwame Kilpatrick's wife, mother, and children in court for closing arguments. At least 3 or 4 of the jurors all said that meant nothing to them at all. Whether Kilpatrick had family support or not, they just looked at the testimony. There was one interesting quote from a female juror, middle-aged African-American woman, who said that she had previously voted twice for Kwame Kilpatrick, and she said today that she wasn't angry, but she was greatly disappointed. She said, quote, "I saw a lot of evidence that really turned my stomach. I couldn't believe this was the man I voted for. Never was I angry. I was just very disappointed." She was asked later, this African-American female, about her thoughts regarding making this decision, knowing that Kilpatrick could spend up to 20 years in prison. She said, quote, "I feel bad for the family members involved. I especially feel bad for the children that are involved, but I do not feel bad at all for any of these defendants." And We heard that clearly from each juror, that although they had a lot of evidence to go through, although this was an emotional roller coaster for many involved, they said they really feel that by giving this decision that they are the voice of the people of Detroit. They said they do not feel bad for Kwame Kilpatrick. They do not feel bad for Bobby Ferguson. They do not feel bad for Bernard Kilpatrick. The only people they feel bad for in this situation are the families that are affected, and specifically the children that were affected. Again, the jury was very open. They were very honest. And really what struck me was the level of respect these men and women have for each other. They didn't even want to say that they would argue. They called their discussions just passionate discussions. They never wanted even to use the term argument. And you have to assume after 6 months of testimony, after being in the jury room for 3 weeks, you know, I'm sure frustrations reached a boiling point at some point, you would have to think. But you really didn't get that sense with these men and women. You got the sense that they knew they had a job to do. They took that job very seriously, and they delivered the verdict that they feel is right. One of the lighter moments, I guess, during questioning is we were asking them whether they missed reading the newspaper, watching TV, hopping online, and one juror said that she almost felt like she had to go through Twitter withdrawal because she missed her social media so much, but she was excited to get back online today and have an opportunity to kind of catch up and take a look at everything. But really, I think the overwhelming feel in talking with the jury was just an incredible respect they have for one another, and the judge echoed that and thanked them several times for all of their hard work during the last several months.
You certainly see that evidence in their responses to a lot of the questions that you asked, Hank, and some of the other questions and answers that we're looking at in this transcript.
Well, they call themselves the voice of reason and how they viewed their job. And you obviously are very impressed with this group of people, Hank, and so are we.
Incredibly. I mean, because you just think about how difficult this was, beyond just working to come up with a verdict. The strain on their families, on their jobs, their personal lives. I mean, this was asking a lot of these 12 men and women, and also the alternates that were involved, but they all took this job very seriously. And just today, they spoke so eloquently, and they spoke from their hearts and really focused on what the judge told them to, and that was the facts of the case. They didn't let emotion play a role. They said they didn't take a look at what Kilpatrick was wearing every day and make that into their decision. They didn't take a look at his gesturing or his body language. They said it was hard not to sometimes, because Kwame Kilpatrick can be non-verbally, can express himself quite a bit in court. They said they really just focused on the facts of the case, and that's what the judge asked them to do on day one. And that's what they did.
Looking at juror number 6, this juror says, "I can speak for all of us. We had no anger at all. We felt responsibility of impact of charges on defendants and family, felt this was serious, and we had a large responsibility. We had no anger or any other emotion other than the burden, the responsibility we had to render the verdict."
And they also go on to say, and this again, juror 6, she goes, these charges were not victimless crimes. We were able to look at each other and made decisions. We were able to be the voice of the community. And boy, did they speak loudly, Hank.
They certainly did, and I think you're right. They weren't angry in looking at all this testimony. As I said, a few of them used the word disappointed, especially the juror, the African-American female who said she had twice voted for Kwame Kilpatrick. They seemed stunned by the evidence that was laid out. They really couldn't believe the level of corruption being presented in this case. They seemed like it was just this bombshell. And you have to remember, some of these jurors said that before this happened and during the trial that they really didn't pay that much attention to Kwame Kilpatrick and his legal issues in the past. So for some of them, this was very new material. Those of us in the media and those who watch local news maybe were aware of some of the allegations of corruptions or Kwame Kilpatrick's legal problems in the past. Some of these jurors said they really were oblivious to it. So to hear all of this evidence, again, many of the jurors saying they weren't angered by it. They were just greatly disappointed that the person they elected to be mayor of the city of Detroit would apparently commit these crimes.
And we sharing with folks about reactions, one of the reactions that I'm hearing was in the courtroom when the verdicts were coming down, and Bernard Kilpatrick was rather emotional hearing all the charges and convictions to his father. And at that point, Kwame Kilpatrick turned to Bernard Kilpatrick, and you can confirm this because you were in court, Hank, and he said, "It's okay, Pops."
Kwame Kilpatrick had his back to me. What I can tell you is I could see Bernard Kilpatrick, and he looked at Kwame before the jury came in, and he said, "You got this." But you could sense a completely different range of emotions between the Kilpatricks and Bobby Ferguson. When Bobby Ferguson walked into that courtroom, he was hugging his family members, shaking hands. At one point, he gave a high five. When the Kilpatricks walked in, you could tell they were preparing for the worst. And as the jury read the verdict, the look of disbelief on Kwame Kilpatrick's face is one that I won't forget. And also Bernard Kilpatrick looking at his son, you could see that he was getting emotional. His lips started and his chin started quivering. It looked like he was going to start crying as all the charges against Kwame Kilpatrick were being revealed. All the guilty charges were coming out. We had to wait a while to hear more about Bernard Kilpatrick's charges, but again, the sense in the courtroom was utter disbelief.
All right, Bobby Ferguson making his way back to federal court. Kevin Dietz was trying to track him down. And this is a man who has been lighthearted, almost ebullient in his demeanor since hearing about these convictions, and has professed his faith in God, has quoted Scripture, has said that it's in God's hands, that God is good, and that his faith is strong. Didn't have anything to say on the way in to the courthouse.
Just briefly, he said, again, he said that he's ready, it's in God's hands, and he's comfortable with whatever happens here. Kwame Kilpatrick also hustled into the courtroom just a couple of minutes ago, and Kwame Kilpatrick had nothing to say as he made his way into the courtroom. However, we have talked with all three defendants' attorneys now, and they say they think it is absolutely imperative that this judge not remand them today, not lock them up, allow them to have the ability to prepare for sentencing and not lock them up. They said that in this courthouse, and I've covered federal court for many, many years, it is very rare for them to lock someone up immediately after a guilty verdict unless it's a very violent criminal, a drug dealer, somebody who's victimized children. Typically in corruption cases, they allow you to remain out on bond, but prosecutors have said, particularly when it comes to Kwame Kilpatrick and Bobby Ferguson, they feel there is a flight risk, that there's millions and millions of dollars in missing money, and that they believe these two men should be locked up and should not be out on bond out of fear that they will be that they may.
Okay. Can you hear me, guys? Okay. Okay, we're live outside of Buell Building right now. Mr. Ferguson, do you have any comment? You have no comment? What about your son? Do you have anything to say about the verdict? No. That's okay. Okay, what about Bobby Ferguson? He just spoke.
He has no comment.
You know I feel
I
terrible.
understand, but I just wanted to find out if you had anything to say. I mean, obviously you've got a guilty verdict, and we've been waiting for you to say something to the people. I mean, they obviously have been supporting you for many years, and now they want to know exactly what you have to say.
I'll say it.
Don't you think that you owe that to them? I mean, you said this is your city.
When I get ready to say it, I'll say it.
Well, I understand, but this is the time, sir. This is the time. This is decision day.
No, it isn't.
Well, it isn't? Why not? What about your son taking millions of dollars from our city? What about Bobby Ferguson?
He didn't take a dime.
He didn't take a dime? He was found guilty, sir.
Kwame didn't take a dime.
Then who took the money? Yeah, you were found guilty, sir. Any comment?
Please back up. Back your arm up.
I am backing up, ma'am. And you are watching Bobby Ferguson drive away right now from the Buell Building, as you saw, trying to get some kind of comment. As you noticed, he used to make comments coming out of court, was obviously not wanting to make a comment. And then when I asked him about the money, he said Kwame didn't take a dime. So obviously there is no recognition of this verdict. They don't agree with it. It'll be interesting to see what happens in court in just a little bit, guys.
All right, thanks. Bernard Kilpatrick still steadfastly defending his son. Thanks so much, Karen.
And we will continue to keep you updated as we await this hearing in court. That begins at 1:30. That's when a decision will be made, whether or not bond will be offered to all of the defendants. And if you are leaving for any reason, you can always stay up to date as well at clickondetroit.com.
But we hope you'll stay with us. We will have full coverage on that detention hearing and much more analysis of these jury verdicts when we come back.